would like to invite Maya Manzi, one of our postdoc researchers of MESILA during the preliminary phase, to give her comments on the three contributions. And I would like to introduce her. Maya is a PhD in geography from the Clark University in the US. And before working at MESILA, she was a postdoc in the postgraduate program of architecture and urbanism at the Federal University of Bahia in Salvador. Now she's back in Salvador as a professor in the postgraduate program in territorial planning and social development at the Catholic University of Salvador de Bahia. Her research areas are political ecology, critical agrarian studies, and urban and regional geography. And her research interests are territorial and socio-environmental conflicts, social movement practices, knowledge politics, and practices.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I want to thank you also for this opportunity to be the discussant for this session. So I will just do a brief commentary on our presentations. So the presentation of our guests, I've shown common threads that I would like to highlight in my short commentary. First, as they have argued, the so-called current era of the Anthropocene or Capitalocene, with its increasingly catastrophic socio-environmental consequences, is pressing us to reconsider our place and our role in the cosmos as human beings. There is also a common understanding among our presentators that one of the necessary and fundamental steps to address our current ecological crisis is to decenter the Western human subject. In order to find ways of relating, connecting, and coexisting with the more than human that are less exploitative, oppressive, and destructive. Moving beyond our anthropocentrism, speciesism, and human exceptionalism thus requires overcoming modern dichotomies between object-subject, nature-society, and human-non-human, among many others. For this, we can learn from indigenous ontologies, which are made of interdependencies and interconnections, rather than separations between multiple forms of beings. We can also see from the presentation some affinity between the work of Professor Majas and Professor Atloff, who seek to extend the sociological and anthropological concept of gift-giving or methodological animism and exchange or régime de troca beyond strictly social relations to include the more than human, to use Sarah Watmore, the geographer concept, instead of non-human being. Non-human, yeah, or non-human being is fine too. Professor Astrid Ulloa provides a more explicitly political or post-colonial perspective on nature-society relations by challenging the very idea of the Anthropocene, showing how the discussion around these concepts tend to reinforce anthropocentric and ethnocentric approaches to nature, while depoliticizing the environmental by universalizing the consequences of human action across the planet, thereby erasing their uneven distribution and impacts in time and space, and also across socially differentiated groups. Thus, all three presentations invite us to revise our ontological grounds in order to create new political spaces that can include more than human subjects. However, convivial configurations between so-called humans and non-humans are assemblages shot through with unequal power relations. This is why approaching nature-society and human-non-human relations through the concept of conviviality in its nexus with inequality may allow us to account for their interdependencies, continuities, and co-constitution without depoliticizing their performances and manifestations and their implications in gendered, class, and racialized politics and practices, among other lines of differentiations. Before passing on the baton to the audience, I would like to ask some broad questions that I think each of you could answer, but I leave it to your discretion to pick and choose which one you're more comfortable to answer. These questions can also be addressed to the audience if you wish to answer them. You may also answer all of these questions if you want to. It depends, because I think we have time. Yes. Okay. Oh, less than I thought, so maybe not. So I will tell you, I will present you my 4 different questions. First of all, I would like to know, well, you all seem to acknowledge the continuities and interdependencies between humans and non-humans, an ontology shared by different philosophical, cultural, and disciplinary perspectives. However, we know from feminist and post-colonial theories that our epistemologies are situated in the world and are forged by our being in the world, and therefore are also producing and produced by ontologies. Thus, epistemologies and ontologies are hard to dissociate. However, proponents of the ontological turn have pointed to the importance of shifting from a concept of cultural difference, which assumes that there is one universal reality and multiple cultural perspectives on this reality, to a concept of ontological difference, which assumes that there are multiple worlds and realities. This reminds us of Ivero de Castro's indigenous perspectivism, which offers a multinatural rather than a multicultural perspective. However, if epistemologies and ontologies are so closely intertwined, how can we avoid an inconsequent substitution of culture by ontology? So I would like to know your opinion and position on this. This is my first question. The second is as follows. We agree that there is an urgent need to overcome the modernist separation between nature and society by showing how they are mutually constituted. However, how can we do this without falling into sameness, which is another way of colonizing the other by erasing differences and universalizing dominant visions? Some of you have pointed to this issue, like Professor Atloff. Could you expand on this question and how you think the concept of conviviality inequality could help avoid this pitfall? My third question is, what do you think are the limitations of a monadologistic conception of the world? And are there other ways of approaching human-non-human relations in a non-dualistic, non-anthropocentric, and non-ethnocentric way? And finally, what makes conviviality a useful concept for your work? Thank you very much, and I will leave now the place for the audience to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maya. I think we can have some more questions to put them together in the answers.
I'm not from the anthropological background. My background is international relations and political science, and I'm doing a master's in the same field. And what I've noticed from your lectures and also addressing your last question and your maybe not really a question, but your suggestion of discussion. And I would like to put some fire in the discussion, saying that I've been noticing in my studies and also from your presentations that we have a rather Western vision of things. So if we are trying not to, I don't recall the word you said, but equalizing everything. If we're not trying to equalize everything, shouldn't we address or refer to authors from the East? I miss it in my studies, and I kind of miss it here. And I'm not sure, but just by reading the names you've mentioned, if there are some Eastern concepts in anthropology and the social sciences that we are not reading and not getting to know. I don't know if I'm clear in my comment here. Thank you.
Then we have Sergio.
So I have myself a question. Actually, my question is already inserted in some questions made by Maya, but Maya puts but this is in a very abstract way. I will be more directly focused on my point. Is actually, I have the suspicion that in all three cases, if you are claiming for political alliances with human non-humans, or in case of Frank, epistemological alliances, the question is, what about non-humans? Are they prepared to get in alliance with you? So the question behind the question is, perhaps is your way for overcoming anthropocentrism a kind of, perhaps, speciocentrism, in that way that you think politically, but also epistemologically, from a human perspective, and you are offering an alliance for some non-human actors which cannot really answer to your question. So this is a joke only for the Brazilians. Falta combinar com os russos.
We have Samuel as last one in this round.
Eu poderia perguntar para qualquer um dos três, eu vou escolher o Stélio. Eu acho muito interessante toda essa agenda de questionar a grande divisão e natureza-cultura e tentar nos acordar do sono antropológico. É realmente uma agenda que eu acho muito interessante. Uma dificuldade é a infraestrutura de pesquisa e de como está organizada a nossa universidade para possibilitar esse tipo de pesquisa, não? Porque é preciso uma grande aliança entre humanidades, biólogos, ciências cognitivas, e nós não temos essa infraestrutura. Esse é um centro ainda muito centrado em humanidades. Por exemplo, o Instituto Santa Fé, em Palo Alto, né, que para mim é algo paradigmático para isso, ou o Max Planck de Leipzig, de evolução humana. Mas a gente não, são raros esses centros, né, de colaboração. Então eu gostaria de saber se você consegue esse diálogo com biólogos e também do lado das ciências duras, porque os não-humanos também são as máquinas, também são algoritmos, e às vezes nas falas a gente acentua muito os vivos, né? Mas os não-humanos são o 0 e 1, são os códigos binários, e isso tem um enorme impacto, né? Todos viajamos de avião aqui e eram não-humanos que estavam nos trazendo, não era o piloto humano que conduziu o avião, né? Era um programa. Mas então não é só o biólogo, a gente precisa do matemático também. Então, e falta essa infraestrutura, né? Então eu queria saber como é que você lida com isso.
I would say that we start with the answers of the two who are present here, with Stélio and Astrid, and afterwards we switch to Frank again.
Bueno, muchas gracias por las preguntas, son bien complejas. Hay una cosa que me da una sensación que queda bueno, no sé si en las 3 charlas, espero que no en todas, es como la noción de armonía de la naturaleza. Y la naturaleza es disrupciones, irrumpe, quiebra. Entonces, esas ecologías de lo que irrumpe toca tenerlas en cuenta, porque no, las otras ontologías, las otras relaciones no son solamente de dar, son más que de dar y de recibir, siempre como los dadores. El no humano es agresivo. El no humano negocia, el no humano tiene conflictos. O sea, ese tipo de relaciones las vengo trabajando hace muchísimos años, más de 30. Entonces, la idea de que toda esa interrelación humano-no humano es armónica, no es cierta, ¿sí? Hay unos intercambios de la reciprocidad que requieren vidas humanas, por ejemplo, y de eso a veces no se habla. Sí, se requiere que el otro tenga, el otro sí tiene voces, el otro sí puede hablar. el otro habla de diferentes maneras. Y para contestar un poco, si el otro puede hablar, yo trabajo con el agua. El agua es un ser entre un pueblo, que es el pueblo wayuu, es un ser vivo, es un ser político y es un ser que tiene mecanismos para cambiar y confrontar, cambia de rumbo, inunda la casa, tiene agrede, ¿sí? Si tú no cumples como wayuu cierto tipo de prácticas. Entonces, las negociaciones, los conflictos, las resistencias también están entre humanos y no humanos. ¿Qué pasa? Que nuestro lenguaje sigue siendo dual, humano, no humano. Todas estas maneras a veces no podemos responder a lo que implica. Y tu pregunta también, ¿qué pasa con otras culturas? Nos quedamos cortos. Por eso yo acoto Latinoamérica y por eso acoto indígenas, que es lo que poco que sé. Pero otras culturas es muy complejo, ¿sí? ¿Cómo entender otras nociones territoriales, otras circulaciones de sentido? Yo creo que si estamos en deuda con eso, no las tenemos claramente, ¿sí? ¿Qué pasa con... se borra la igualdad puede borrar esas diferencias, sí, en el sentido que estamos en igualdad, pero no necesariamente borra las diferencias, pero las diferencias están presentes y esas diferencias pues las tenemos que ver siempre, porque esas diferencias sí son situadas, responden a contextos específicos y todavía no miramos eso. Yo siento a veces que estamos pensando en el otro como si fuera también perfecto, y no, confrontan, son políticos, cambian de estrategias, subvierten, vuelven a usar esas identidades. Entonces yo creo que yo me siento a veces como en un déjà vu en muchas de estas discusiones, porque además en la antropología tienen, no sé, más de 90 años, más de 100 años estas discusiones. No es nuevo, mejor dicho, la antropología había planteado eso, se reconfiguró y se está retomando. Si uno mira todos los que citamos hoy, la mayoría vienen de la antropología completamente. Entonces, hemos visto esas otras ontologías, sí, las hemos visto, pero esas ontologías han estado ahí permanentemente, han estado en conexión siempre, y hemos estado nosotras, por eso Latour retoma a Descola y Descola retoma a los indígenas para decir nunca hemos sido modernos, ¿no? Esto implica pensar de otra manera. Sí, claro, pensar de otra manera. ¿Cuáles son las maneras en la discusión académica? Sí requiere otras miradas. Sí, yo trabajo con agua y ya me volví experta en agua. Ya sé cuánto tiene el caudal, cuánto todo. Trabajo en cambio climático y trabajo con climatólogos. Porque sí hay que crear. He trabajado en conservación y sí hay que entender que cuando yo hablo de no humano, están entendiendo otra cosa completamente diferente. Cuando hablo de naturaleza, son múltiples nociones de naturalezas, aún en la academia. Entonces, esos diálogos sí deben ser permanentes. Y si podemos, ¿qué es convivialidad? A mí me parece que lo que presentaba al final es una categoría analítica que se está volviendo atravesando. Si bien era previa, lo que yo encuentro en los debates de antropoceno es que emerge cada vez más como convivialidad, pero yo creo que ahí sí hay que hacer énfasis en lo que planteaban al comienzo y también lo resaltaba Sergio, siempre en contextos de desigualdad, ¿sí? Esa convivialidad tiene fricciones, tiene confrontaciones, no es tan armónica tampoco, implica a veces no solamente dar, pero no querer dar, pero estar ahí. O sea, no es tan fácil. Lo pienso en el contexto donde trabajo, donde hay minería, hay intereses diversos, hay confrontaciones, hay una cantidad de diversidad de situaciones. Encontrar esos espacios no es tan fácil porque siempre, lo que tú resaltabas, siempre es situado y está atravesado por relaciones muy desiguales en contextos localizados. Y ya para cerrar, eso es un poco la llamado. En estas discusiones que se vuelven tan globales, siempre tenemos que pensar que hay situaciones específicas, particulares, atravesadas por una serie de relaciones y desigualdades que no es fácil tener una solución de Occidente cambia de ontología de un día para otro y vuelve a repensar y retoma del otro, del indígena que siempre retoma del otro, vuelve a ser una actitud bastante colonial, ¿no?
Acho que eu começo pelo Sérgio e com tentativa de comentar à altura o que ele coloca. Quem sabe eu possa passar por algumas das questões que a Maia colocou e outros. Veja se eu resumo bem o que você colocou, Sérgio. No fundo, você está perguntando, ok, não humanos, na política, na vida, alianças, como ouvi-los? Como ouvir esses não humanos? Como trazê-los, de fato, para a política? Né? Bem, tem um livro do Latour que é exatamente sobre isso, né? Que se chama Política da Natureza. Então, ele fala em parlamentos, que a gente poderia chamar de cosmopolíticos, né? Como ouvir? Bom, os cientistas estão falando o tempo todo pelos não-humanos. Não? As bactérias e vírus, e os bichos, e as plantas, e a atmosfera, e rio. Eles estão dando voz a esses não-humanos. Melhor, estão reconhecendo voz a eles. Então essas vozes estão aí, sempre estiveram. Isso para falar só dos cientistas. O chamado conhecimento não científico, indígena, por exemplo, também está falando por isso que nós chamamos de não-humanos. Separar humanos e não-humanos faz algum sentido para nós. É melhor do que natureza e cultura. A natureza já está agregando um monte de coisas, e cultura também. Humanos e não-humanos é um pouco melhor, mas nem funciona muito bem para os índios. Então essas vozes já estão aí no conhecimento científico e não científico. Queria te ouvir, se isso responde um pouco à sua questão.
Perhaps I say it in English because of Frank,
Okay.
in order to he can now understand. Then my point is quite simple, because if you are suggesting, you are claiming for an alliance, a political alliance with non-human beings, and the question is, if you know that they are interested in go into this alliance with you. This is the very simple question.
That's not true. Não é nada simples essa questão. Por isso que eu voltei a palavra. Você quer falar? Ok.
Hay dos procesos. Los Kogi, cuando hablan, es un pueblo indígena. Ellos dicen, es el territorio el que nos está hablando. El territorio, en el territorio es vivo, es un ser que actúa, y el territorio permite que se esté o no se esté. El territorio, o sea, el humano, el cuerpo humano es la representación del territorio. No es el territorio la representación del humano, y eso lo dicen todo el tiempo. Y otra de los ejemplos, hay una estudiante Kamsha, pueblo indígena, y las plantas, y eso es algo que entra en la discusión y que a veces no pensamos que lo no humano, pues, bueno, animales y todo, pero las plantas, el agua. Entonces, el ser, que es la ayahuasca, dice qué hacer, o sea, incide y transforma las realidades, y es el que da el consejo, es el que dice, ¿sí? Y a veces no te quiere hablar, y a veces sí. Y el último es del agua. El agua demanda derechos demanda sus territorios y los derechos de intimidad. La intimidad. A mí eso me parece una idea maravillosa. O sea, reclama intimidad para sí misma. Entonces, no permite que entren las mujeres, que son sobre todo las que están después de ciertas horas, porque si no, te molesta, te agrede. Entonces, reclama los derechos y a veces no quiere alianzas, te saca, ¿sí? Y si tú no le gustas, te excluye, ¿sí? Entonces sí hay casos por eso no es tan armónico, es complejo, y son alianzas que más de dadores es de reciprocidad, de a cambio. Los Embera le piden a estos seres que les den animales, pero ¿a cambio de qué? Sí, hay que ofrecerles. Hay que emborracharlos, hay que seducirlos. Entonces, la seducción es importante. No es tampoco, hay que engañarlos a veces, ¿no? Entonces, esas relaciones son bien complejas, pero sí tienen voz propia. Quizás no la oímos nosotras, sí, pero sí están.
I would like to give Frank the opportunity to answer too. We are going to switch to you now.
Yeah, I tried to. I'm not sure if I got everything right. First, I'd like to reply to Maya, what makes conviviality useful, you asked. Now I see you. So I would stress that conviviality is something else than just a kind of social order. Social order would be the technical term we have in sociology, and conviviality can be, of course, related to patterns of inequality, to violence, and all the bad things, so to speak. But there's a normative ideal in it. And I would always stress that we have to be aware of the normativity within the term of conviviality, and that is the strength of it, because we need a kind of a normative ideal to judge forms of conviviality which are good and very acceptable, and other forms of non-conviviality or conviviality very much related to issues of social inequality which are not acceptable. So I would make the point that within conviviality there's a normative idea in it. And that is also related to the other questions. I think from the audience came the question, if we do equalize everything, and if it would be reasonable to have a look to the East. I cannot offer the look to the East, but I would like to stress that the idea of the gift is very much related to the idea of non-equivalence. So that is a huge difference between gift giving and economic exchange. In economic exchange, normally you try to exchange equivalences. And within gift exchange, you don't have the notion of equivalence. You don't know if there's something coming back at all. And if there's something coming back at all after you gave something, you don't know what it is and how much of worth it is, and so on. So it's really decoupled from the notion of equality, equivalence. And that is, I think, the social ground of gift giving is something that sociality, conviviality is always based on issues, notions of non-equivalence. That would be my main answer to that. And then the last question, an answer to Sergio, if the non-humans are prepared for our offer of alliances, if I got that correctly, I would answer that we have to make several distinctions between several kinds of social and political order and between various species. For example, if we take up another terminology like peace and war, then the current state would be that we would have to describe it like this: we are in war with nature without having declared war. So we are not in a state of war as a contract. So there is a war going on, and it would be more honest, so to speak, if we declared war, meaning that it is understandable where we destroy nature, where we only take without giving or returning, and so on. So that would be the first part, to say an alliance could also be like a contract of war. But then the next step would be a contract of peace. And then the question comes into the scenery if the non-human actors are interested in a kind of an alliance with us. And that depends. In most of the cases, they would be content to have a kind of a contract of non-interference. So let us alone, give us our ecosystems back and let us alone. That would be one kind of alliance. Other kinds of alliances are more related to other kinds of animals. If we think, for example, of pets or farm animals, there's really a kind of cooperation going on between humans and non-humans. And that has to be, in a way, codified. Well, that is a real alliance, so to speak, where we see that there are gifts going back and forth, and that that the non-human animals, the non-human actors, also are interested in a kind of cooperation. And the main political idea would be all the entities who are willing to cooperate and who contribute to the wealth of a society, so to speak, they should have the political rights to be involved in the decisions. That would be the political turn of my sociological take on these questions. So for certain entities, certain non-human actors, there would be the question of a kind of citizenship on the table, whereas other entities would only be interested to be left alone, to have a contract of peace, or at least a contract of war.
Eu preciso dizer uma coisa, quer dizer, acho que nós estamos falando aqui de porta-vozes. Porta-vozes de humanos e porta-vozes de não humanos. Nesse sentido, ambos têm essa simetria, precisam de porta-vozes para falar. E eu estou dizendo, há porta-vozes de não humanos, sempre houve, cientistas ou não. Eu comecei a desenvolver uma atenção que, assim, em qualquer frase tem sempre um não humano ali. A questão é bem ou mal representados, né? Então, alguém lá no Congresso falando de petróleo, então ele está sendo um bom porta-voz do petróleo? Quais outros porta-vozes? Então, acho que a questão passa por aí, né? Eu preciso rapidamente comentar o seguinte. Tem, Maia, um texto muito interessante do professor brasileiro chamado Mauro Almeida, que é o marido da Manuela Carneiro da Cunha, né? Então, ele fala em concordâncias pragmáticas ou acordos pragmáticos entre diferenças. Então, há grupos, claro, muito diferentes entre si. Então, um que acredita, sei lá, na Amazônia, acredita em caipora como uma entidade que regula a caça e o desmatamento, e os ecologistas estão pensando outra coisa. São duas ontologias muito diferentes, mas há uma concordância, um acordo pragmático entre eles que permite a ação. Então, não se trata de reduzir as diferenças, mas de alcançar esses acordos pragmáticos. Samuel, absolutamente difícil mesmo. Você estava falando, eu me lembrei de uma imagem para comentar, tenho que ser muito rápido aqui. Eu vou usar uma imagem que o Bruno Latour usa quando ele disse que tentou ler o Alfred Whitehead, que é um filósofo muito difícil, e ele diz, né, estou lendo isso para comentar o quanto é difícil esse trânsito entre ciências, digamos, humanas e ciências naturais, por exemplo, ou ciências exatas também. É muito difícil. Eu vou tentando, e um pouco acontece o seguinte, como o Latour lendo Whitehead, ele diz, eu estou lendo, nada acontece. E não está entendendo, o Latour não está entendendo, né? Mas não vou nem uma vez eu tentei ler, né, aquele livro Conceitos de Natureza do Whitehead, realmente dificílimo, parei no meio e nem lembro o que eu li. Mas o Latour então diz, eu estou lendo Whitehead e num dado momento acontece o que acontece àqueles que estão na beira da praia tentando enxergar baleias. Você fica ali um tempo todo, nada acontece. De repente, vem a baleia e volta a submergir de novo. E aquilo é uma coisa maravilhosa. Então, eu acho assim, muita coisa. Acho que é uma boa imagem para comentar essa tentativa de conversa com os cientistas naturais ou das exatas, né? Na maior parte do tempo nada acontece, porque a gente fica falando de superficialidade, já tudo muito estável demais, um já sabe o que é humano, o outro todos já sabem demais. Mas de repente acontece uma coisa espetacular que não acontece quando a gente está conversando entre colegas, um pouco como se dá nas interdisciplinaridades entre humanidades, né? Eu tento ler os cientistas naturais, eu chamo alguns dos colegas para os meus cursos, e aí às vezes é isso mesmo que acontece. A gente nem sei bem o que está acontecendo naquela conversa, mas de repente tem algo, é uma baleia que aparece.
Okay, I would like to give the microphone to Paula because she wants to contribute to the answer to Sergio's questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that maybe the correct, I think, wording or framing would not be so much a politics of, as you all mentioned, but rather an ethics. And that would exactly go to your point to say an ethics of conviviality in this whole kind of, post-anthropocentric, perhaps post-capitalist situation would be a few steps before, instead of, demanding or assuming or knowing that those will be with you on board on certain politics. An ethical stance would be to listen, to ask, exactly to, just recognize which voices, which logics, which kind of practices, which kind of sense-making might there be. And that would be the first and most important question. So which other sense and world-making and lives and dynamics are there? And how can we kind of try to acknowledge them before we know what they are? So I think, for me at least, in this context, more than a politics, an ethics of conviviality is much more important. That was all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you for all your contributions to this panel. Thank you very much to all of you, and we will meet again at 5:30 here after a coffee break.